His speech marked the beginning of Western interest in Hinduism as a vital religious and philosophical tradition. Hinduism is predominantly an indigenous religious tradition of the Indian subcontinent, and it was formed of very diverse traditions. There is no single founder. It consists of thousands of different religious groups that have evolved in India since 1500 BCE. Freedom of belief and practice are notable features of Hinduism. It is essentially a school of metaphysics. Vivekananda was born, his birth name was Narendranath Datta. He was born in Calcutta in 1863 from an aristocratic, affluent family. His father was an attorney, and his mother was very devout and pious. He was a child prodigy. He was excellent in everything. He excelled in all his studies. He was a good musician. He was a good sportsman. He was very physically strong. And he was influenced by both his parents. His father had a rational mind, and his mother was very devout. He was always interested in the question of the existence of God. Interested in metaphysics. He was educated in the British schools of Calcutta. At this time, of course, the British had their capital in Calcutta, and they had introduced their system of education. They introduced Christianity, and in the schools, which were run mostly by the Christian missionaries, they studied Western logic, Western philosophy, and the history of European nations. He went around asking everyone, have you seen God? Have you had any direct experience with God? So this was the big question that he was concerned with, and he never really got a very satisfactory answer. So, as I mentioned, Calcutta was the real meeting ground of the East and West. There was a tremendous synthesis of both cultures that were taking place in Calcutta. It was the center of modern education, science, culture, and politics in India. It was really considered the capital of culture in India. And the British introduced their education and their missionaries. The documented history of Calcutta begins with the arrival of the English East India Company in 1690, when the British were consolidating their trade in that part of the world. At the time that Job Charnock came to Calcutta, Calcutta was really just 3 fishing villages at the mouth of the Ganges. The Ganges River, which of course starts in the Himalayan mountains and flows down the Gangetic plain of India, and it empties out many, many, many tributaries to where Calcutta is. So it was a natural harbor, and the British set up their commerce, their trade. They traded, of course, with China, with all of those countries there, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Burma, as well as inland into India from the rivers, navigating the rivers. So it was a very major port city. So in the school that Swami Vivekananda was studying, his principal, who was a reverend, was teaching about a literature class, William Wordsworth's poem, The Excursion. And he was having a little difficulty trying to explain about mysticism and trance, which come up in Wordsworth's poem. And so what he told his students is that if they really wanted to know about mysticism and trance, they should go visit Sri Ramakrishna at the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar. Here is a picture of the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar. It's right on the banks of the Ganges tributary. And here are some pictures of the temple, of the goddess Kali, who was the the deity at the temple. And here is a picture of Sri Ramakrishna, who was the priest who officiated at the temple. Kali is the goddess of eternal energy, of time and transformation. And the Kali temple was built by a very wealthy widow. Her name was Rani Rashmani, for the worship of the goddess Kali. She had been planning to take a pilgrimage to Benares, which was the very holy city on the banks of the Ganges, so that she could worship the Divine Mother. And this was going to be a big ordeal, this trip. So the night before she took the trip, she had this dream, and Kali came to her in the dream and said, "There's no need for you to go to Benares. Why don't you build a temple for me right here in Calcutta, and I will come and manifest myself, and you can worship me right here in Calcutta." So she purchased land, and for several years, it took a few years, she had the temple built. And then Ramakrishna's elder brother was given the job of priest at that temple, and Ramakrishna came when he was 16 to help his brother. And then when his brother passed, he became the official priest at the Kali temple in Dakshineshwar. And here's a picture of Sri Ramakrishna and his wife, Sarada Devi, in meditation. Now, Ramakrishna served as priest for 30 years at this temple, and during this time he brought many, many pilgrims and a lot of fame. Now he was a mystic, and he experienced what's called Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And he also experienced the religious truths from both Christianity and Islam, both of which were very prevalent in India, along with Hinduism. Conventionally uneducated, he attracted the attention of the Bengali elite and also a lot of the Western intellectuals. They recognized that there was something very genuine in him, and they recognized that the soul of India really spoke more directly through Ramakrishna than through any of the learned publications that were, coming out in Calcutta. So Nirvikalpa Samadhi is a meditation that takes the mind to transcendental self-consciousness, which grows to cosmic consciousness. And this is really the goal of all Hinduism. The ego consciousness, the soul consciousness, and the ocean of spirit are seen all existing together. The distinction of the knower and knowing, object and known, all become dissolved, as waves vanish in water and as foam vanishes into the sea. Enlightenment reaches its full glory. So Narayan went to see Sri Ramakrishna because, of course, he was interested in the question of God and questions of mysticism. And his meeting with Sri Ramakrishna was a turning point in his life. He asked Sri Ramakrishna the same question he'd been going around asking everyone else. Have you seen God face to face? And Ramakrishna answered very directly, yes, I see him just as I see you, only more intensely. So Narayan was rather impressed. And initially he rejected a lot of Ramakrishna's teachings because at this time in India, all the intellectuals of the Bengali society, they had really turned away from all this idol worship and gods and goddesses, and they were more metaphysically inclined. They were promoting a monotheistic ideal where there's only one God, and they didn't really approve of or worshiping different gods and different images of God. So he was not, he was very skeptical about Ramakrishna initially, but he was still fascinated by him. And so he kept going repeatedly to see him again and again, and he started seeking his counsel. And over the course of 5 years of training with Ramakrishna, he got to a point where he accepted Ramakrishna as his guru and wholeheartedly became his disciple. The teaching of Ramakrishna, first he taught that all religions are true and that each soul is potentially divine.
Yes.
And that that what we need to do is to reveal the light of divinity that is within us. That is each person's goal in life, is to recognize and reveal and manifest the spark of divinity that is in each person. And also that service to man is the most effective worship of God. So even though they felt that attaining this samadhi, this super consciousness, liberation, or nirvana as it's known in the Buddhist terminology, even though that is the goal in life, it's not a goal that you just reach and then just leave, and it's not a goal that you strive for just for yourself, because if you're striving for that just for yourself, that's not really spiritual, that's selfish. But so you're striving for that so that you can serve humanity and bring that consciousness into the collective human consciousness, so that you know. So anyway, service to man is the most effective worship of God. And when Ramakrishna passed, or just before he passed, he called all his disciples and he gave them the monastic robes, and he gave especially to Vivekananda all that he had, all of his knowledge and enlightenment and power he transmitted to Vivekananda, and also gave him the name Vivekananda at that time. So after he passed, his disciples formed a monastery, and that was the very first of the monastic order of Sri Ramakrishna. And Swami Vivekananda, at that time he still went by the name of Narayan, was the leader, and he stayed with them for about 2 years. And then he felt a calling to see the larger world. And he took the life of a sannyasin, which is an itinerant monk who renounces all worldly possessions. And he traveled for 5 years all over India with just his staff and his bowl. And he had 2 books that he carried with him. One was the Imitation of Christ, and the other was the Buddhist scriptures. And he lived on alms, only on alms, and he traveled on foot. But he had many admirers, and sometimes they would buy him railway tickets or give him their hospitality. And he met with people from all walks of life. So for 5 years, he came in contact with all kinds of people. And here's a picture of India. As you can see, Delhi is up in the north. It's in the center of the Gangatic plain. And Calcutta is over just at the top of the Bay of Bengal, where the rivers all run out into the Bay of Bengal. So he traveled all over. First he went to Delhi, and then he came down the west side along the Arabian Sea side, and then he went to the very, very tip of southern India, Cape Cameron. And here at Cape Cameron, he swam. He swam out to this rock, the one on the left. He swam out to the rock, and he sat on the rock and meditated for 3 days. And during this time, he resolved on a plan. He had been really appalled to see the poverty of the masses, and he really felt that it was his calling to try to do something to help the people, that they needed. They needed, well, first of all, to be fed, but they also needed tools and resources to develop their agriculture. And Anyway, so here is where he came up with the plan to come to America. He wanted to come actually to help raise money to help the masses of India, and also he felt that India had a lot to offer America as well because of its ancient spiritual traditions. This is a picture, a night picture of that same rock where he had meditated, and they now have a Vivekananda temple there. Kanyakumari is the name of the town there at Cape Kumar, and it's named after the goddess of that town, Kanyakumari. So after coming to America, we already talked a little bit about his speech and how well he was received at the Parliament. He was really one of the most popular speakers of the whole Parliament. And he received many, many invitations to give lectures and to form study groups. So out of that, he developed the first Vedanta Society in New York. And now, of course, there are Vedanta societies all over the world, including here. We have, in California, there are several in California. There's one in Southern California that's very, very large.
Actually 1894, I think.
Oh, yes, it should be 1894. A little typo there. 1894, sorry about that. We're just bringing everything up to right now here. Then when he went back to India, hi Rupa, come on in. When he went back to India, he established the Ramakrishna Math, which is the Ramakrishna Monastery, and it's located in Calcutta. And he also established the Ramakrishna Mission, which was, it's both the monks and regular lay people. It's a form of social service. They have hospitals, schools, and colleges, and work on rural development and help with rehabilitation for victims of natural disasters. So it's a very, very big organization all over India. And the Vedanta societies are all over the world. Now, in July 1902, while he was meditating, he passed away. And he was cremated at Belramont. He had actually pointed out where he would like to be cremated. He pretty much predicted his own passing. And the temple stands there today. So the basic teachings is that each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity within. You can do this by work, by worship, by philosophy, by any of these. Education is the manifestation of perfection already in man. Religion is the manifestation of perfection already in man, and serving man is serving God. He had a tremendous influence on all of the leaders of 20th century India. India for centuries had been subjected to invasions and attacks by various groups of people. This was continuous throughout its history, absolutely continuous throughout its history. And there was a certain resignation and a certain apathy that had developed amongst the people. And so Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, their teachings really helped to restore a sense of pride in their traditional values and traditional culture, and also to establish a sense of nationalism. At this point, I'd like to invite Kundan Singh, who is a resident here at our ashram, and he's a recent graduate, actually a couple of years now, graduate of CIIS from their East-West Psychology program, and Kundan did his dissertation on the evolution of integral consciousness. And Kundan, will you please come and speak to us a little bit about Vivekananda's influence? Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Am I audible at the back?
Do you want this?
If I am, then I'll take it. I think that's a wonderful talk that Rita has given on the life of Swami Vivekananda and his teachings, and also she touched upon the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. A little bit into the background of the influence. I think even in our very midst, through Cultural Integration Fellowship, Swami Vivekananda is very much present, because as Rita was pointing out, Swami Vivekananda was a big influence on the life of Dr. Chaudhuri and Vinadi. And he was a big influence on Sri Aurobindo and the mother. It's quite well known that the influence of Swami Vivekananda on Sri Aurobindo is quite well known. But what is not known so much is that when the mother was in Paris, and when she was having all these wonderful experiences, mystical experiences, which she could not actually get a hang of at that point in time rationally, was explained to her by a book by Swami Vivekananda called Raja Yoga. And the mother says that she read this book and she fully understood what was going on in her life, and that provided a big impetus to her own spiritual life and integral yoga. As far as Sri Aurobindo is concerned, as Rita pointed out, that Swami Vivekananda passed away in 1902, and Sri Aurobindo was incarcerated in 1908 when he was fighting for India's freedom against the British. While he was in jail, and after he had one profound spiritual experience when he saw Sri Krishna in everything and everywhere, Swami Vivekananda came to him in an ethereal body and spoke to him for 15 days at a stretch. And Sri Aurobindo says that he would not leave till he had to speak to him everything on the future of his spirituality. So in a certain sense, Swami Vivekananda laid the foundation of Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga. He explained to him many of the subtleties and nuances of Indian spirituality, and Sri Aurobindo also says that Swami Vivekananda told him about supramental, which happens to be an integral component of integral yoga. For all the people who are new here, I would dwell upon supramental for a little bit. Sri Aurobindo says that between the planes of Sat, Chit and Anand, which are also unified in a spiritual experience called Satchidanand, and the three planes of matter, life and mind, there is a particular plane, and that particular plane, which is golden in color, is a clue to the resolution of all the different oppositions and conflicts that you see between different conflicting philosophies and religion. It is the harmonizing plane, the experience of which brings everything together. All the oppositions, all the contradictions, all the paradoxes are resolved. So this is a very, very important plane of existence. And Sri Aurobindo and the mother also say that this plane, though was seen by many of the Vedic seers, an effort was not made to bring that plane into the earth consciousness. So their whole idea, or this whole yoga towards the later years of their spiritual life, was to bring that supramental force or that supramental plane into earth's existence and and implant it in earth consciousness, so that it could propel a collective transformation. So that was, that is the effect of supramental consciousness that they had envisioned. And the details of this supramental consciousness and the supramental plane was actually told to Sri Aurobindo by Swami Vivekananda. And Sri Aurobindo says that he did not, of course, use the term supramental, that is his creation, but everything was explained. So this is a very, very important component of the influence. This not only gave a vision, a path to the future evolution, but I think, and this is what my dissertation was, that Sri Aurobindo, in a certain sense, carried forward the message that was brought about by Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. In a certain sense, if you say that if Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda laid the foundations of integral yoga, it was carried further by Sri Aurobindo and the mother. So this is one very, very important influence. Rita also asked me to talk a little bit about Advait Vedanta, and as I was listening to her talk, I made certain notes so that I could carry forward from where she had left. Now, this relationship between Narendranath Datta and Sri Ramakrishna has been of a great interest to me, and it is interesting that in my own life, before I came to integral yoga, or before I came to practicing integral yoga, or I took Sri Aurobindo and the mother as my gurus, Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna were a very, very important influence. This was when I was 17, and I was, for some very unknown reasons, I was very interested in learning about Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. And then, for some odd reason, I took a detour of learning Western philosophy and psychology and all of that. And that endeavor of mine got disconnected, if one may say. And then when I got to know about integral yoga and I got to go deeper and deeper into it, suddenly this realization dawned upon me that I need to look into this connection of Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna, and Swami and Sri Aurobindo in a very, very big way. However, in my studies, this relationship, as I was telling you, between Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna has been of a very, very of a great interest to me. The primary reason was that Sri Ramakrishna was very, very loving and caring towards this particular disciple of his. Probably, through his spiritual visions, he knew what he was to unfold in the future. But this disciple, he was not the ordinary disciple who would come to a guru and just surrender. He was not one of those kinds. He, as Rita was pointing out, that he had developed this rationalist temperament, which he had inherited from his father, and also because of his training that he was undergoing in Calcutta at this point in time. He tested Sri Ramakrishna in many ways before he actually took him as a teacher, and I think that's a very beautiful way. We have come to know about the abuse of teachers of the many disciples in the last 30-40 years, and one of the reasons why I also feel is because the students, the disciples, really don't test their teachers with respect to what the teachers can bring into their lives. And in that sense, Swami Vivekananda was absolutely exemplary. Not only he would ask him in many different ways whether he had had a direct communion with the divine. One day he heard Sri Ramakrishna say that he cannot tolerate the touch of money. If he comes in the vicinity or in some sort of closeness with money, his something begins to happen in his body. So what Swami Vivekananda did was that he slid a coin under the bed of Sri Ramakrishna, and as Sri Ramakrishna sat, he jumped up and like a spring, and he says, "Who has put that coin under my bed?" That was a very important test that he did of his guru. And then, of course, it's like intermittently he would come and ask him if he had seen God, So one day, what Sri Ramakrishna did was that he touched his forehead with his toe. And lo and behold, that instituted a grand spiritual experience for Swami Vivekananda, where he saw the oneness of everything and in everything. What he experienced was just energy, the movement of energy happening in every nook and corner of the world. There was just one energy, and that gave him the certainty of what he taught later, which was the Advait philosophy. That there is just one, there is no other. This is just one consciousness which has become everything in this world, and it is that one consciousness which moves everything in this world. And also I would want to bring this important fact that what Swami Vivekananda achieved was also because of the tremendous spiritual strength that he had gained in his lifetime. And as Rita was pointing out, just before Sri Ramakrishna passed away, he called Narennath Datta, Naren, as he used to affectionately call him, and sit by his bed. And then he closed his eyes and he transferred all his powers and all his spiritual experiences into him. And then, Sri Ramakrishna was a very simple soul. And then he started crying. He started crying like a little child. And Swami Vivekananda asked what happened. And he says that today, Naren, I have become a beggar. I have become a pauper. I have given you everything that I had. Big things will happen through you. And you will carry the name of this tradition in a very, very big way. And soon after he passed away. Of course, Swami Vivekananda did not really understand the import of what Swami Vivekananda, of what Sri Ramakrishna was saying. But if we take his life into account, it is for all of us to see what he left behind. This massive organization, this massive upliftment, I think, which he brought to the masses in India, and he opened this channel in the West of the transmission of India's spirituality, not in an intellectual way, but in a spiritual and experiential way. So I would want to talk a little bit about Advait Vedanta at this point in time. If you look into the writings and teachings of Swami Vivekananda, Advait Vedanta is the core of his teachings. If you would look deeper, and if you would look into, or rather, if you compare him with somebody who was a protagonist Advaita, Vedantin, Sri Shankaracharya, you can almost get this feeling that this man, was an incarnation of Shankara. In the sense that the way he used to conduct his inquiry, Advaita Vedanta is very, very logical in its approach. It's not faith-based, it's logical, it is rationalistic, and it progresses very step by step in sort of explaining to you, first intellectually, that there is this one divine. There is nothing but this one divine, and all that you are identifying with, that is not true. It is Maya. It is illusion. If you think that you are body, you are not your body. If you think that you are your life, you are not your life. If you think that you are your mind, you are not your mind. You are nothing. You are none of these. But you are this one existence which inherently you are, but you have forgotten. So the first step is to understand this logically and intellectually, and then engage in spiritual practices so that you can know it spiritually. This is the essence. And I think he killed many birds with one stone when he began to teach Advaita Vedanta. Now, the reason why his teachings also became very famous in the West was because of the rationalistic tirade that was launched against religion. There was this very steep divide. I think this steep divide still exists between science and religion, but at that point in time, it was even more stringent. And he comes and he says, well, this whole thing, this whole exercise, this whole spirituality, it's very, very scientific. It is about direct experience. You know the truth, you know it in your experience, and then believe it. You don't have to have a faith in this right from the very beginning. You can actually get into the laboratory of spiritual practice, conduct certain experiments, and if you will proceed step by step, there would come a time when you would know that it is experientially true. So he made Advaita Vedanta or spirituality or religion very, very scientific. And that was another reason why it really appealed to the Western masses. Now, the second thing that he did was to explain many of the Christian precepts in very logical and scientific terms. For example, love thy neighbor. Now, why love thy neighbor? He would say that inherently you are one. Everybody is one. You are not different from your neighbor. You are not different from anyone. So, loving and caring for others, it's a very, very natural thing that you must engage in. Or, let's say, for example, why we should not be selfish, why we should be self-giving. And he would explain that when you are engaging in all these practices, then you are expanding yourself. You are connecting with that oneness. So when he began to explain the religious and the spiritual precepts in such rationalistic manner, he was very well received, and probably that was the reason why, which also led to the immense popularity that he gained. Way back in India, he brought about Advaita, and he told people that all the different sects that are in existence over here, they are coming from that one source. There are different paths, there are different ways to the divine. And then he also talked about fearlessness. He said that when you get to know, when you know that it is that oneness which is within you, There is nothing to fear. You are not going to die. So basically, rise and connect with that source so that you don't live in this miserable condition. But I think, we are out of time, and I would stop here. This is a very, very interesting topic for me always, which kind of gets me very excited. So, Rita, I will just...
Yoga several times. Can you explain just a little bit?
A little bit on integral yoga?
Yeah.
Giving a synopsis of integral yoga is very, very difficult. Let me try. Sri Aurobindo has...
Practice the religion?
Yes, it definitely is a practice. The reason why it is integral is because Sri Aurobindo and the mother, they synthesized different forms of yoga. Now, yoga is one particular word, right, which means union with the divine. But there are so many different types of yogas. There's Hatha yoga, there's Karma yoga. Hatha yoga is what you mainly do through your body. Then there's Karma yoga, which you do through primarily through work. Then there's Bhakti yoga, which is through devotion. And then there's Jnana yoga, which is through your intellect, through using your mind. So what Sri Aurobindo and the mother did was they took the central, the central aspects of each of these yogas and created a system of their own, right, called integral yoga. So,
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Kundan.
Oops.
Well, I can just talk about it. That's fine. So just to follow up a little bit on the concept of integral yoga that Kundan talked about. As he said, the concept of yoga actually comes from the word yuk, which means union. It's really the same word that yoke comes from, where you yoke the oxen together, but it means a union with the divine. And there are several different types of yoga. Swami Vivekananda actually wrote treatises on several of these yogas. One is, the one that's most commonly known here is Hatha yoga, which is the yoga of the body. The body is a temple and you must, take care of your body. So Hatha yoga is a path towards the union. Also there's the Jnana yoga, which is the yoga of the intellect, which is really the yoga that Swami Vivekananda was most attuned to. And Bhakti yoga is the yoga of devotion, which is the yoga that Sri Ramakrishna was most attuned to because he was very devoted to the worship of the goddess Kali. And then there's Karma yoga, which is the yoga of action and the yoga of work. So these are the main different types of yoga, and from that evolved the concept of synthesizing and integrating them so that they're not all separate pieces of your life, but you can approach them with an integral view. And I might want to say just a few words of Hinduism since the subject came up. It is demographically the world's third largest religion after Christianity and Islam. It has more than 1 billion people. About 1 billion of them live in India, and other significant populations are in Nepal, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. And of course it's spread somewhat, around a lot of the concepts of Hinduism. And one of the main ideas that's really central to Hinduism is unity in diversity. That is really a very central concept in Hinduism. the rishis said there is one God, but experienced in many, many different ways. And one of the reasons that this evolved, Hinduism, dates way back to 1500 BCE, and there's no formal founder, there's no formal creed. It pretty much evolved from the collective consciousness of all the people that came and inhabited India. India geographically is very isolated. We saw that picture of India before. There's water on both sides at the bottom, and on the top, of course, there's the Himalayan mountain range, which is a very, very formidable barrier. There's, it's like 150 miles thick across, 2,000 miles long, and about 5 miles high. So in many ways, you may think this is somewhat impenetrable, but of course, the snows melt and the rivers cut the mountain passes, and so people can, of course, find their way in. And so they did, of course, from the steppes of Central Asia, where the land was frigid and inhospitable, and so people did find their ways. There were constant migrations over the mountain passes down into the very, very, very fertile plains of India, where you have the Indus River Valley and you have the Ganges, and so it's a life of paradise, basically, So people, of course, constantly came, and completely diverse populations came. Some were just, coming migrants to settle, but there were traders, there were armies. I mean, there was a constant influx of armies that came and conquered. Some just came and looted and went back, but most of them actually came and stayed. And once they came, their descendants stayed, and India actually had a population of over 1 million people by the 4th century. 4th century after Christ. There was lots and lots and lots of people, because they all came, they all stayed, and it was so constant, this influx of people, and they were so very, very diverse that there wasn't a lot of blending that happened. They pretty much lived in separate communities, and they had completely different beliefs, they had different gods, different mythologies, different practices, and it was absolutely imperative for some sense of unity to allow for all these different people to be able to live together with some sense of harmony and cohesion. And so that's why the rishis, who were the thinkers of the time, said, yes, there is one God, but experienced in many different ways. And so this concept of unity and diversity developed in Hinduism. An analogy that's often used for that is that of water, which is, in essence, it's always the same substance. Whether you call it water, H2O, pani, jal, aqua, whatever you want to call water, it doesn't change. It doesn't change its essence. It's always essentially the very same substance. It's also experienced in many, many different forms. You can have raindrops, you can have the ocean, you have the rivers, you have the pond. So it takes many, many forms, but in essence, it's always the same. So this is kind of an analogy that's used. So just to put that into context a little bit. Anyway, Vivekananda is, of course, very, very highly regarded in India. And here is a statue of him that in front of his ancestral home. This is the home where he was born and raised in Calcutta. The Ramakrishna Mission recently took it over and refurbished it, remodeled it. So here's a picture of the statue of Vivekananda in Calcutta in front of his family home. And here's another shot of that same home. Calcutta, because it was built by the British, had fantastic mansions. You think of Calcutta as a really poverty, and of course it has that too, but really it's a city. It was known as the city of palaces at one point. And here is the cultural center, the Vivekananda Cultural Center, that's right next to the ancestral home. This is a picture of Fort William, which was the fort that was built by the British and named after King William III of England. This was the original fort. It still exists today. There are now actually two forts. There was another one, the new one, that's used by the army, and the old one is used as a customs clearinghouse. This is St. Paul's Cathedral, which was built in Calcutta by the British during their Raj. And this is the Victoria Memorial, which was the memorial that was dedicated to Queen Victoria, who was, the Queen of England and the Queen of India as well, of course, during their rule. This is in the very center of Calcutta. And this is just a picture of metropolitan Calcutta. So I can conclude by reading a few excerpts from his concluding address at the World Parliament of Religions. And then we can maybe take a couple of questions, and then we have refreshments, and we can have continued discussions over refreshments, and we also have some lunch. So, concluding address. The world's Parliament of Religions has become an accomplished fact, and the merciful Father has helped those who labored to bring it into existence and crowned with success their most unselfish labor. My thanks to those noble souls whose large hearts and love of truth first dreamed this wonderful dream and then realized it. My thanks to the shower of liberal sentiments that has overflowed this platform. My thanks to this enlightened audience for their uniform kindness to me and for their appreciation of every thought that tends to smooth the friction of religions. A few jarring notes were heard from time to time in this harmony. My special thanks to them, for they have, by their striking contrast, made general harmony the sweeter. Much has been said of the common ground of religious unity. I am not going just now to venture my own theory, but if anyone here hopes that this unity will come by the triumph of any one of the religions and the destruction of the others, to him I say, brother, yours is an impossible hope. Do I wish that the Christian would become Hindu? God forbid. Do I wish that the Hindu or Buddhist would become Christian? God forbid. The seed is put in the ground, and earth and air and water are placed around it. Does that seed become the earth or the air or the water? No. It becomes a plant. It develops after the law of its own growth and assimilates the air, the earth, and the water, converts them into plant substance, and grows into a plant. Similar is the case with religion. The Christian is not to become a Hindu or a Buddhist, nor a Hindu or a Buddhist to become a Christian. But each must assimilate the spirit of the others and yet preserve his individuality and grow according to his own law of growth. If the Parliament of Religions has shown anything to the world, it is this. It has proved to the world that holiness, purity, and charity are not the exclusive possessions of any church in the world, and that every system has produced men and women of the most exalted character. In the face of this evidence, if anybody dreams of the exclusive survival of his own religion and the destruction of the others, I pity him from the bottom of my heart and point out to him that upon the banner of every religion will soon be written, in spite of resistance, help and not fight, assimilation and not destruction, harmony and peace and not dissension. Thank you. Thank you very much.